Hello everyone, we're back with another Cosmic Matrix episode with your hosts, myself Bernhard Günther and my wife Laura Matsu. And this is going to be an intense and big one. The title of this episode is Mastering Emotions Amid Chaos and America's Election Astrology. So this will be a deep dive. Overall, we have noticed that many people in the world are becoming increasingly affected by the chaos happening all over the world, really globally. We also see how many are dealing with a backlog of suppressed emotions and unconscious trauma based on what has happened over the past 4 years, really since the so-called pandemic. And now as we near the elections in the US, which will be held on November 5th, there's a lot of anxiety and fear about the future. There's fear of World War III. And also what happens here in the United States will affect the whole world as well. It's also already affecting people unconsciously, even if they don't follow the news, because of the intensity of the field of consciousness that affects all of us during this intensifying time of transition we are currently in. At the same time, there are also positive things happening as well, which we see, for example, with the bigger focus on health, initiated by RFK Jr. and Nicole Shanahan, and a very amazing recent Congress hearing on health and childhood chronic disease, and looking at the influx of chemicals that are being allowed into our food supply. So that's definitely good news to put focus on that, make America healthy again. And really the whole world, because food is a really big issue in this day and age. And so more and more people are actually coming together and questioning the official narrative from all walks of lives and from all kinds of political affiliation, which is a positive thing. And also this crisis, which we have seen over the past few years and it's intensifying now, has also turned people more towards God and the divine in various ways, right? That's part of the awakening as well, your sincere aspiration and surrender to the divine. Having said that, at the same time, many people have also gotten black-pilled, stuck in fear, negativity, and paranoia. So, on this episode, we'll zoom out and look at what's happening from a bigger picture astrological perspective. We'll talk about a key transit affecting us as we head into the elections, and what the final Pluto retrograde back into Capricorn means before it heads back into Aquarius. We'll talk about how our emotions affect how we see the world and how we see ourselves. We discuss the 4 ways of how most people deal with negative emotions and stress, which keeps them trapped in self-defeating and disempowering patterns for the most part. Hence, we'll show you how to handle any stressful situations and how to transmute any negative feelings into positive ones so we can stay more grounded and aligned, coming from your true selves and essence while we move through this evolutionary process. Now, in the second hour, for anybody who's new to our podcast, we always have a second hour where we go much deeper into various topics, and you can sign up to the second hour at my website, veilofreality.com. We have currently over 135 episodes listed there, which you will have access to all the second hours. So in that second part, we will go very deep into the US natal Pluto and evolutionary journey of the US from an astrological perspective, what the goals of the US are from an evolutionary astrology perspective, and how the current political candidates can help or hinder the US with its evolutionary intention or not. We look specifically into the charts of RFK Jr., Trump's chart, and Kamala's chart in the context of the US birth chart, natal chart. Some very, very interesting things happening there. And furthermore, we'll discuss Wetiko, the concept of Wetiko and occult forces in the context of the times we're in right now. There are many misconceptions people have about Wetiko since it has become more popular, and the necessity to really face evil in our darkness within in order to defeat and transmute the evil in the dark and the dark in the world. So this is a big dive, And let's start with what's going on astrologically right now.
I want to start by prefacing that Mars will be in Cancer right now for an extended journey. Mars usually spends 1.5 months in a sign, but instead we're going to get multiple months of Mars in Cancer. It entered on September 4th this year, and it will enter Leo on November 3rd, and then it will retrograde back into Cancer on January 6th, and basically retrograde and then go forward and stay there until April 18th, 2025. So we have a long period of Mars, mostly in Cancer. And what I find interesting about Mars in Cancer is that our desire to protect the family, the home, Cancer is associated with the archetype of the mother. These are all themes. And isn't it interesting how the whole focus is on protecting children as a theme of this election season, with Robert Kennedy Jr. wanting to protect children's health and look at the causes of childhood disease by investigating the poison that's going in our food supply. And on a more personal level, Mars doesn't do really well in Cancer. In traditional astrology, they call it its fall, which means it doesn't operate well here. It doesn't have a lot of resources. It's not in its natural placement for it. So people can be feeling a lot more on edge, more moody, more sensitive, more easily triggered, more reactive than usual. Obviously, this is not helping the situation with the U.S. heading into election at all. One of the key aspects of Mars in Cancer is a drive to create a secure home environment. So you might see more people stocking up on food or focusing on security. Ultimately, the higher expression of Mars in Cancer is not to become overly defensive or overly reactive, by having a deeper understanding of how our emotions motivate our reaction. So this is a really excellent time to look inwards at the source of your triggers, to feel your feelings, to use whatever is triggering you in the outside world as an opportunity to understand your inner world better. And those who don't will most likely have difficulty with this transit and become more combative, sensitive, or passive aggressive. And then Mars will also form a sextile to Uranus in Taurus around October 24. So there's going to be also an element of like needing to break free from societal expectations, needing to find new ways of doing things, also infused in this, especially as we head into the election on November 3rd. So there's going to be also a little bit of a rebellious energy coming into this as well. And at the same time, we also have Pluto coming back into Capricorn one last time, which it retrograded back into Capricorn September 1st. So Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008. And if you have placements in cardinal signs like Libra, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, you're going to be wrapping up a 15-year cycle of some pretty intense karmic lessons at some point in these last 15 years. So Pluto is going to stay in Capricorn until November 19th, 2024, and then it will settle finally into Aquarius, where it will stay for 20 years from that point forward. And during Pluto in Aquarius, fixed signs will be under more pressure to evolve during that period, because Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio will get hard aspects, conjunctions, squares, or oppositions from Pluto at some point during that period. And so as we head into the last journey of Pluto in Capricorn, I want to share a headline I saw the other day, which really encompasses us being at this 29th final degree of Pluto in Capricorn. And the headline was from Bloomberg, and it was: most in the U.S. no longer trust any institution, from organized religion to Congress to the presidency to the mainstream media, etc. So that's kind of where we're at now, because some of the keywords for Pluto is birth, death, rebirth, the collective shadow, the collective unconscious. It examines our relationship with power and the misuse of that. It represents darkness, death, decay, destruction, repressed feelings, especially ugly feelings like rage, deep fears, survival instincts, transformation, and regeneration. And Capricorn represents tradition, authority, discipline, the material realm, public achievement, professional and social status. It's also related to conservatism. So we saw a lot of exposing of corruption as Pluto was in Capricorn in these institutions. We saw a rising of a deep distrust of authority. We also saw the rise of a new conservative movement. But then interesting, we also saw the rise of authoritarianism on the other side, because Pluto works in extremes. So you have some people kind of rebelling against the past, and then you have some people kind of capitulating to the social order in a stronger way than they ever had before. And just to kind of remind people the vibe of what Pluto was when it first entered Capricorn in 2008, well, that was related to the 2008 financial crisis and recession. In 2011, we saw the rise of Occupy Wall Street. Also, it was related to the Me Too movement, which was trying to expose abuse of power in the entertainment industry. It brought in themes of economic destabilization and the desire for the collective to take their power back from institutions, along with expose corruption in these major institutions like the mainstream media, like government, like the entertainment industry. And then very interesting, in 2020 to 2020, well, to pretty much now, as we ended this cycle of Pluto and Capricorn, we saw more this rise of authoritarianism, starting with the COVID mandates, where we saw a large amount of people showing both obedience and also disobedience to authority at the expense of or to protect their personal freedom. So again, Pluto works in these extremes. It's not just one way or the other. And some of my favorite, or not my favorite, but some of the most classic Pluto near the end of Capricorn phrases that I found was trust the experts, trust the science. Yeah. We basically saw the rise of these collective slogans where we're not allowed to choose for ourselves, and instead we need to defer our freedom of choice to whoever the collective authority is, authority being a keyword of Capricorn. So basically, a lot of us were told to just go along with the masses, even if it meant taking some sort of treatment that would risk your life. We also saw the rise of totalitarianism, the increase of censorship, increasing government control. And at the same time, you saw the rise of distrust in many of these institutions.
Real quick, so the final push in the end, degrees of Pluto and Capricorn, 4 years ago when the COVID pandemic started, all of that also was part of was it the Pluto-Saturn conjunction?
Right, yeah, that was Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically we saw this enforcing of COVID mandates. We saw the increasing rise of distrust in many of these institutions, from the media, medicine, public education, because a lot of them enforce these mandates, and it also became clear they become ideologically hijacked. But interestingly, one of the only industries we saw a rise in trust in, as per that headline I referred to, was a rise in trust in small businesses. So that's positive, because Pluto tends to destroy that which is not in integrity. It tends to unearth a lot of shadows from these industries, a lot of shadows from the collective unconscious. Well, in Capricorn, we saw all the corruption that were in these institutions being exposed. And also the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, and showing how common sex trafficking was in these circles of power. And there's also these themes of conservatism and tradition rising up. So these are other Capricorn themes. So we also saw some people who believe we just need to go back to the old ways of living. We saw a rise in the trad movement, the traditional movement, which focused on growing our own food, having lots of kids, getting married young, becoming self-reliant, which is a combo of Pluto and Capricorn, strengthening traditional values of the past with Uranus and Taurus, this desire for food sovereignty. And at the end of it, we also saw the rise of many public figures reverting to traditional religions like Christianity, and even taking it to an extreme, as Pluto usually does. And we saw a movement of religious fundamentalism rise up too. And the reason that we see these themes across the spectrum, from a return to tradition to wanting completely rebel against the traditions of the past or rebel against authority, is because Pluto always takes things in extremes. It doesn't do things halfway. So when we're looking at how we handle Pluto, we either overdo it or underdo it. So in Jungian terms, Pluto, when we overdo it or underdo it in relation to the archetype of the sign, it's a sign of a complex, which means that we have a personal unconscious cluster of memories, perceptions, emotions that organize a common theme. So it's like really about examining our relationship to authority, tradition, all of these things. And they actually constellate also around the archetype of the father too. So isn't it interesting how we saw people completely rebelling against the patriarchy and then some people being like, no, we need to go back to the patriarchy.
That relates to also our past episodes where we had talked about
wound.
the father wound,
Totally.
the father complex, and the mother wound, the mother complex. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So we're really, kind of closing out this 15-year investigation with our relationship to authority, to the father, to tradition. We're looking at also what aspects of these past structures need to be strengthened and carried forward into the future in Pluto and Aquarius and Pluto and Pisces and so on, and what needs to be discarded. And at the same time, we're uprooting all that's not in integrity in these institutions that we've come to trust on for so long. So that's why a lot of these institutions are crumbling and people are losing trust in them because there's been certain things exposed in them which are not actually in integrity and something will need to change. So now we're kind of in the rubble of like, where do we go from here? Where are we to go with education? Where do we go with the media? And you do see new forms of it rising up already. So you have people on one side of the extreme wanting to destroy everything that has to do with the traditions of the past, all of the traditions that form the bedrock of society, to the capitalist system, to, and they basically want to go in more favor of a new social structure, which is more communist and socialism, which unfortunately is related to Pluto and Aquarius, which is these ideologies that focus on an ideal which can be obviously destructive when implemented. And then we also have people swinging to the other side of the pendulum. They just want to go back to the past, to a more traditional era where men work, women stay at home, have babies, everyone goes to church every Sunday, and we have a return to more strict gender roles. So this is kind of the splitting that we're at now, and it's not going to get resolved when Pluto enters in Aquarius, unfortunately. Like, we have people almost firmly holding onto the Capricorn structures of the past, and then on the other side, we have people completely rebelling against it. And I don't think there's going to be like any common ground anytime soon. I actually think this division and fracturing will carry forward into Pluto and Aquarius. So even though, there's a lot, it's very interesting because both parties, both the Democrats and also the Republicans, RFK Jr. and Trump, focused on unity. But then shortly after, Kamala started focusing on unity too. So there's like almost this collective dream of unity. And I've also felt that too, like I wish that we could start talking to each other again. I wish we didn't have to label people who disagree with us like bigots and Nazis or whatever, and like this name calling and stuff. But you really do see this splitting of society in very different directions in relation to what happened in Pluto and Capricorn. So as Pluto moves into Capricorn one last time, we're going to see this last hurrah. Pluto exposes more shadows, destroys more aspects of these institutions which are not in integrity. Isn't it interesting? We now have this P. Diddy arrest, basically showing how one of the most famous rappers and producers of the 90s and 2000s actually was involved in some very shady stuff. And keep in mind, P. Diddy was a very powerful figure. I mean, he was friends with Obama. He was friends with Ellen. He was the mentor for Usher, Justin Bieber, also Ashton Kutcher. Like, everyone went to P. Diddy's parties. And it doesn't mean guilt by association, by the way, but we have to see that he was in a vast network of power and something's going on there, right? Something's crumbling because he kind of belongs to the old institutions. Even I've heard that a bunch of celebrities like Usher and Pink suddenly deleted all their social media.
By the way, on this real quick, there was a community note on X clarifying. I don't know, one of them was either Usher or Pink deleted their post because their account got hijacked.
Oh,
with
okay.
some meme coin
That's good
stuff.
to know.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. And then even someone else, who was it? This famous actress that they said deleted her account. This like sexy actress. What's her name?
Megan Fox.
Megan Fox. Yeah, she deleted her social media a while ago. So, we also have this, by the way, concurrently, we do have Neptune in the 29th of Pisces. It's hard to tell the difference between truth versus lies right now. We're just in this like very distorted Neptunian reality, right? And So, we're left in this wake of Pluto and Capricorn with a lot of people no longer trusting the mainstream media, especially if you listen to this podcast, you're probably on this side of the extreme. They don't trust the mainstream medical system. They don't trust the universities. They don't trust the schools because they've been ideologically captured. They don't even want to send their kids to these schools because of the indoctrination they'll go through. And on the other side of the coin, you have people reverting to the other extreme and become total authoritarian followers of these institutions. They believe anyone who steps out of line with the status quo needs to be censored.
Yeah, I can see there even another extreme, what you mentioned in terms of Pluto and Capricorn, no longer trusting mainstream media, medical system, nobody trusting any authority. And it's very understandable, but at the same time, the other extreme, we have seen this in the truth movement.
Yeah.
David White and I recently had an episode about this. We talked about this black-pilledness,
Which
like
is
complete negativity, don't trust anyone, everybody's part of the cabal, and it's a psyop, and it's a trap, and it's the other extreme, right?
Yeah, which also does relate to Pluto and Capricorn. So now that was more just the regular astrology perspective, but now I want to go into the more psycho-spiritual side. So I want to look at the Pluto and Capricorn archetype more from an evolutionary astrology perspective. So one of the key words with Pluto and Capricorn is suppression, repression, depression. So when things get too dark, when they get too heavy, if you live in a totalitarian society, you actually have to learn how to suppress and repress your emotions in order to just survive. Like anytime you go through something difficult that's too much, too fast, there's a certain amount of emotional suppression that goes on. And if it goes on for too long, it leads to depression. And then interestingly, futility is a huge aspect of this archetype, a feeling of like, what's the use? Society always blocks me. Everything is messed up, right? And this is stemming from experiences in the past where we were judged, persecuted by society, forced to conform into roles which didn't reflect who we truly are. And we saw that actually, that people are really black-pilled and nihilistic because of what's happened in the world, what they've gone through. And it's also because of the unprocessed grief and emotional suppression that had to happen for them to survive these past few years. So they're kind of in this place where they don't trust anyone or anything anymore. But this is just an expression of actually how they've handled Pluto and Capricorn in the last 4 years, where it's like the end, and they're totally nihilistic and they have this futility about life. So the higher expression of this is to be more discerning by taking what's useful from the past, discarding what isn't. So it's not just like it's all screwed and we're all messed up and what's the use, There is aspects of the past, centuries, which are still useful. There's still the bedrock of the Constitution, which we'll talk more about in part 2. But this overly nihilistic black-pilled thing is basically a result of people suppressing a lot of the grief from the last 4 years is turning into depression.
You could say it's a trauma response.
Yeah, you can. Whenever you see someone who's like overly negative and overly focusing on the negative and complaining, you're mostly likely dealing with someone who has depression. And depression is a result of suppressed emotions. So we need to also create a certain foundation to build from the future. It's not like screw everything, everything's messed. We need that foundation, actually. So we need to be more discerning. But most of all, the whole point of Pluto and Capricorn is so that we develop a connection to our own inner authority rather than just deferring to outer authority. So rather than just bending to the consensus, the social order, conforming to what society, the mainstream media, the so-called experts tell us, it's using our own internal authority to guide us. And that connection to our own internal authority will help us on this journey of individuation, which Pluto and Aquarius will demand of some of us. So, as Pluto goes back into Capricorn, we're seeing the last of institutions that are no longer in integrity collapse. I think this is continuing forward. Isn't it interesting how even I think JFK Jr. wants to also have something to do with the CIA.
RFK Jr. Yeah.
RFK Jr., right? So, we're going to see this last collapse of these.
By the way, real quick, it's back in Pluto and Capricorn right now for how long again?
Until, I said at the beginning, November 19th, 2024.
So the elections will be during Pluto and Aquarius.
Yes,
and
exactly. So that's going to be interesting. So we're going to see the last of the institutions that are no longer integrity collapse. We're going to see what needs to be strengthened and carried forward, what needs to be destroyed. And we also need to deal psychologically and emotionally with the impact of Pluto and Capricorn, especially the suppression, repression, depression aspect. Because if we don't deal with the deep grief that Pluto and Capricorn transit brought up, it's going to move into dissociation as Pluto goes into Aquarius. So just to close up, and this kind of ties into kind of the intended solutions, is that the Pluto and Capricorn polarity point is Cancer. And what's interesting is that Pluto and Capricorn is actually opposing that Mars in Cancer transit as we're going through this. So deep-seated emotions can come to light. We can face tests and challenges on a soul level. It can give us a lot of an energy to achieve our evolutionary intentions as we channel this warrior energy of Mars with Pluto's intensity. So we have the opportunity to create profound change on an emotional level too, but it requires very careful handling to avoid destructive outcomes, because Cancer is the opposite sign of Capricorn. So it's the intended evolutionary direction. So we as a collective are being called to not deny or bury our feelings, to develop emotional maturity. We need to focus on being more nurturing towards ourselves and healing our emotional bodies. This means we need to look at how our past, childhood, family dynamics are affecting us by focusing on our inner world, and which is really how we deal with what's coming up in the world, how we stay grounded and how we can help the world in this transition phase of our collective evolution as Pluto moves back into Capricorn and then into Aquarius.
Excellent. That's very insightful. Thank you for the astrological insight. And we'll go deeper then the second hour, specific with election astrology, looking at all the candidates and the natal chart of the US. Very fascinating what's happening there from a bigger picture evolutionary perspective. But speaking of what you mentioned, really pointed out the important aspect of Pluto and Capricorn, how it relates to suppression and repression of emotions and resulting in depression, right? That we need to rise up to a high level of emotional maturity, which I would say is the opposite sign, Cancer, right? That
yes,
also is
exactly.
The water element, needs to be more embodied. Or
yeah. Emotional maturity is a key word of both Cancer and Capricorn. So it doesn't mean that like feelings are facts and our emotions are everything, but we have the sensitivity and awareness to use our emotions to help guide us in the outer world.
Exactly. Great. So that it's a great lead into now let's talk about how emotions and stress really affect how we see the world and how we see ourselves. Very important to understand nowadays. And it goes deep into inner psycho-spiritual work and somatic work. But it's important to understand that there are 4 ways with how humans, generally speaking, deal with emotions, specifically negative emotions as they come up. And that is either repression, suppression, projection, or escapism. So the suppression of emotion is actually conscious avoidance of negative feelings, of just stuffing it down. When you feel, like, let's say sadness, resentment, guilt, shame, or even anger coming up, you don't like to feel it, you just suppress it down, you just avoid it. Then repression is actually an unconscious way of suppressing your emotions, mostly because of guilt and fear over these feelings. They get immediately pushed into the unconscious and out of awareness.
So suppression is where like you consciously like feel something and then maybe you distract yourself in some way and, but then repression is like you don't even realize you're having those feelings to begin with.
Exactly. Most people have repressed feelings without knowing it, right? Because it's completely unconscious. Then the other quote unquote escape of how to deal with negative emotions or avoidance of dealing with negative emotions is expression or projection. Then the negative feeling is vented and verbalized in order to release some of the inner pressure while the rest stays suppressed. So it's kind of like a release valve, right? Valve. However, there's the venting or projection of this emotion, mostly externally towards others or circumstances, does not resolve the feeling or let it go. So the mere expression of a feeling externally, which is most often geared or targeted towards others or situations or the world at large. Now we're angry at the world. Tends to give that feeling actually a greater energy, right? And you give it more energy without resolve. It kind of makes it worse over time.
Yeah. So like if I'm dealing with anger and then I project it onto someone around me, I've just actually created a conflict with them and more anger in my own field, in my own life, without actually resolving that anger.
Exactly. So it's important to understand it's a big misconception people have that just by expressing their pent-up negative feelings, it frees them from them.
Yeah.
That is the so-called cure, but it's not true. This misconception is also very common, has become almost a justification for self-indulgence at the cost of others, basically engaging in shadow projection. And here's a great quote on that regard from David Hawkins. If we dump our negative feelings on others, they experience it as an attack, and they, in turn, are forced to suppress, express, or escape the feelings. Therefore, the expression of negativity results in the deterioration and destruction of relationships. A far better alternative is to take responsibility for our feelings and neutralize them. And we'll talk about how this works shortly. Then only positive feelings remain to be expressed. And you see this even in the political global stage, right? Even the left projecting their pent-up negative feelings onto the right, and the right onto the left, and the truthers onto the cabal. And and it's a feeding frenzy also from an occult perspective, because other beings feed off of that, literally, as Rudolf Steiner also talked about, right? They feed off of the venting and projected expression of negative feelings, especially charged and violent expressions of anger, hate, resentment, envy, jealousy, and all of that. Right? So now the third way of escaping or avoiding emotions is through escape, right? And that is really avoiding these negative feelings through distraction and diversion. This is also very common, obviously, nowadays through entertainment, social media, internet, Netflix, drugs, alcohol, cannabis, even extreme sports, working out, busyness, workaholism, sex and shopping, and so forth, can also be used as avoidance strategy, as escapism, to not feel those feelings.
Yeah, and I think especially social media is a very common one these days. Like if you feel bad, you think that scrolling on social media and watching people get into heated arguments of what's going on politically will make you feel better. Yeah. But then you end up feeling worse. And not only are you carrying the bad feelings you started with, but now you're dealing with the extra stress of knowing like a million people's thoughts about what's going on politically. So it just multiplies everything.
Yeah, and that's billions of people. And that's why always Gurdjieff said people are like machines, unconscious machines, right? Because they're desperate to stay unconscious, dissociated, and disembodied. That's really the horror of the situation again. And not only that, but it's also encouraged and promoted in society, right? It's a good thing if you work a lot and you're workaholic. It's a good thing if you're busy, right? Work out, do this. And nothing against all of that in doses, but if it becomes an extreme in order to be used as an avoidance to deal with your emotional life, it becomes not only counterproductive, but deconstructive.
Yeah.
So all these four coping mechanisms, suppression, repression, projection, and escapism, do not resolve or transmute the negative emotions. The contrary, it makes it worse over time, as each of these coping mechanisms takes tremendous energy, actually. It takes life force to suppress, repress, or constantly project externally. And I like the analogy, it's like putting a brake on the car while trying to drive it, while trying to speed, right?
Yeah.
With the handbrake on, or speed the car beyond the car's capacity. Over time, the engine will break down.
Well, that's also a metaphor for nervous system burnout, is when you have the gas pedal and the brake on at the same time.
Yes.
So you have a lot of, emotion stirring under the surface or activation in your nervous system. And at the same time, you're trying to suppress it over time. And that's why it will eventually lead to freeze. And freeze is experienced a sense of burnout, low energy, because you're using a lot of energy, but you're also suppressing it at the same time.
Yeah. So in other words, what these four coping mechanisms do to the body-mind-spirit complex negatively, it can show up as constant irritability, mood swings, and somatically in the body via tension in the muscles, neck and back pain, headaches, cramps, even menstrual disorders, indigestion, gut issues, insomnia, hypertension, allergies, even infertility can be also part of this stress response, and many other somatic conditions that over time could also manifest in more severe illness and even cancer. So, and I like to share another quote from David Hawkins, who encapsulates it also very well. He says there's a loss of creativity, energy, and real interest in others. There's a halting of spiritual growth and eventually the development of physical and emotional illnesses, disease, aging, and premature death. The projection of these repressed feelings results in the social problems, disorders, and the increase of selfishness and callousness characteristic of our present society. Most of all, the effect is the inability to truly love and trust another person, which results in emotional isolation and self-hatred.
That's very interesting.
We see that a lot nowadays.
Yeah, so like a very interesting thing to reflect on is to fill in the blanks, I am, and then express how you feel about yourself, and the world is. And this can be an expression of not only the state of your nervous system, but also the state of your emotional health as well. So if you think that I am a terrible person, I'm sad, depressed, the world is unsafe, the world is hostile, etc., that's an expression of something you're emotionally holding in your body. Whereas if you see the world as a safe place, if you see the world as welcoming and it's beautiful, as if you see yourself as a good person, it's an expression of what you have going on emotionally.
Exactly.
So how we see ourselves and how we see the world is dependent on what we're carrying emotionally in our bodies.
Exactly. So this obviously ties into stress. So before we show you in a more practical ways how to truly resolve and transmute negative emotions without falling into the trap of these 4 coping mechanisms, let's look at our relationship to stress, right? We always say these are stressful times, but what is the real cause of stress? That's a good question to ask. Most of us, or the majority of people in the world, like to blame stress for our negative emotions, tiredness, and upset, right? We perceive certain situations and people, be it at home, in our interpersonal relationships, or at work, as stressful. And obviously the chaos and uncertainty on the world stage currently is also stressful to us. However, very, very important to understand, the real source of stress is actually internal. It is not external, as most of us would like to believe or blame, right? The outside world or events for our internalized stress. For example, the readiness to react with fear, anxiety, panic, or anger is directly related to how much fear, anxiety, or anger is already present within us. And it's mostly unconsciously held in the body.
Yeah, so the somatic unconscious, the unprocessed feelings that you're holding from childhood, from your past, are waiting for an external situation to tag into, to be expressed.
To be expressed, to be triggered.
Exactly,
right?
And then we explode on the external world.
So, for example, the more fear we have on the inside, unconscious, the more our perception of the world is a fearful one and even paranoid one, where everything is a trap and psyop, right? It's the foundation of the black pill truth, that they actually deal with a lot of pent-up unconscious fear, which they project externally, and to give it reason to let it, to project it. And it's important, again, to point out that this fear is also repressed and unconscious for the most part. To the fearful person, the world is a terrifying place. Similar with anger. To the angry person, the world is a chaos of frustration and annoyance. To the guilty person, it is a world of temptation and sin, which they see everywhere, as we can, for example, see with the dogmatic fundamentalist Christian movement. An unconscious guilt-ridden person with unconscious self-hatred will only see evil in the world, externalizing it all with a strong desire even to punish or even kill the quote-unquote sinners. It's the unconscious self-hatred projected onto others. So really, really what we focus on and how we see the world is most often what we have repressed, hence the very famous saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, which apparently Anais Nin said, but this question where this quote originated could be others as well. So really important to understand what Laura just pointed out, that all our repressed and suppressed emotions color our perception of the world.
Which is also an aspect of this Mars-Pluto transit we have as well. Yeah. It's like the unexpressed emotions of Cancer is coming up in relation to the chaos that we see in the outer world, the Pluto and Capricorn stuff. So it's actually a very interesting time if you look at psychospiritually, that for emotional transmutation, but most people don't do this, unfortunately.
Exactly.
So it's not really happening.
Talk about it. So going back to stress, Now, stress, it's important to understand that it arises from the buildup of our repressed emotions that are already there. No, nothing is making us feel a certain way. These are already within ourselves. So the pressure from within, from this repressed or suppressed emotion, needs an outlet. And then external situations simply activate and trigger what we've been suppressing, both consciously or unconsciously. Our beliefs and the emotional weight they carry largely determine our stress levels. In other words, very important to understand, it's not the outside events themselves that cause stress, but rather how we react to them, right?
Yeah.
It's common sense too, in a way.
Yeah.
However, what gets us in the way is the rational mind and the ego, because they often avoid confronting the true sources of our emotions within and uses projection to shift the blame, getting caught in the victim blame trap. Always blame outside events for your internal state. It's also the essence, obviously, of shadow projection. It attributes feelings to external events or other people, portraying oneself as the helpless victim while justifying the projected emotions. For example, phrases like, you hear this in phrases like, maybe you've said it yourself, they made me angry, he got me upset, it scared me, or world events caused my anxiety and stress. These are common expression of this mindset caught in unconscious projections.
Yeah. And I just want to say, is that like a lot of us do have even past life trauma, even early life trauma. Like when the world is in chaos and uncertainty, it can really tag into a deep part of us which didn't feel safe in the past. And this can be very historical as well. But as we develop awareness where the origin of these emotions are coming from, we will respond to the world differently as well. Like even with myself, I was like, okay, like it's very stressful, it's stressing me out. But then I figured out actually I got a grounding blanket, which helped me get better sleep. And my whole perception started to change. I was like, oh, actually, it is what I had a more detached relationship with it. At the same time, that detachment can allow me to see what part of my own personal history of not feeling safe, of seeing chaos around me, that this situation is tagging into, but I'm not like reacting from that place anymore. You have to almost gain that objectivity to look at this.
Exactly. And then we talk about shortly how to really transmute these emotions without falling into that trap. Because, so again, most people blame outside events for the feelings we have, for the stress, right? But the reality is that it works the other way around. Our suppressed emotions seek a release and use these external triggers as an excuse. Because most of us, we're like pressure cookers, ready to vent when given the chance, right? It's also called displacement in psychiatry. It means our internal
psychology.
In psychology, excuse me. It's our internal feelings that lead us to react to events in this way.
Yeah.
So, again, to emphasize it, it's because we are angry that events or other people make us angry. It is because we're already angry. It is because we are already afraid, that makes us fear others in the world, or even being afraid of God and so on. And it's very important to understand from a metaphysical perspective as well, is that we unconsciously attract and even create events based on our suppressed emotions and repressed shadow. So that's actually the true law of attraction. It's based on our unconscious and repressed emotions. That's why just to trying to force yourself with positive emotions, smile on your hand, doesn't resolve anything until the underlying negative emotions is felt and transmuted within.
Yeah.
Now, going on, emotions generate a vibrational field that influences the people around us. This is also important to understand. Our repressed feelings can shape the experience we encounter on a deeper psychic level. For example, suppressed or projected anger can draw in more angry thoughts and events to help us justify our anger. That's how we create it, right? We naturally gravitate towards that. And you see this on social media, this whole outrage porn, people gravitate out there to vent their anger, their frustration, their fear. And it's a feeding frenzy of shadow projection.
Yeah.
But, that ties into the original meaning of the psychic or fundamental principle of like attracts like, right? But it's the unconscious emotions again. Hence, again, I want to emphasize it, just forcefully trying to have loving, happy, positive thoughts and emotions while suppressing these negative emotions, not going to change anything.
Yeah.
So as long as we're caught up in the unconscious act of suppressing, repressing, projecting, or escaping negative emotions, We will also actually suppress and are closed off to positive emotions that could help us thrive in life. That's really important to understand. As long as we do not resolve our negative emotions, have this backlog because we suppress, repress, project, avoid, we don't have access to our true self, true essence, and true higher level of consciousness, positive emotions.
Yeah, Osho has a famous quote about it where he's like, as long as you suppress your tears, when you feel joy, the old suppression continues because we're just used to suppressing feelings in general. And I would say this part of repressing, where it's unconscious is the real thing to get to. So as long as you're consciously suppressing, you can't get to the deeper repressing that's happening unconsciously. And this just really helps, I know you're going to give some tools, but this is really also about somatic work, like having a practice where you just sit and be with your experience and be with your feelings as it is.
Yeah. And speaking of that, so let's look into that. Let's give you some practical pointers of how to transmute and truly let go of negative emotions without suppressing, repressing, projecting, or escaping them. Number one, first of all, it's important to become aware of the underlying feeling. And this step can be already challenging for most people who are disembodied and very head-centric, completely closed off from their emotional body.
Yes.
Hence, as you just mentioned, it's important to get into your body somatically via conscious body-mind practices like Qigong, yoga, or somatic meditations, right? To focus on the sensations of your body, which can then free the emotion to become more aware of them.
And one thing I'll add, when you're focusing on the feeling, this is something I learned in my meditation retreats, my meditation practice, is you have to train yourself. So the moment that you feel something uncomfortable, the mind will launch into a perception, a story about why that is.
Yeah.
And that's a form of escaping into the head. So like you'll feel sadness and your mind will be like, why do I feel sad? Who made me feel sad? This is from this, that. You actually have to keep returning to the body as a point of focus and bringing yourself back to the body when you launch into these storylines. And it will happen again and again.
Yeah, exactly. So then as the negative feeling comes up, whatever it may be, sadness, anger, guilt, shame, whatever, what you do not really like to feel, but stay with it. Allow yourself to feel it fully without resisting it, which is, of course, easier said than done because, as Laura just mentioned, all these defense mechanisms will come up. Your mind will try to interfere. There may be also fear of feeling certain feelings. However, the fear of feeling it is actually worse than actually feeling it. Now, very important, as you get in touch with this feeling and allow yourself to feel it, do not try to change it. Don't make it any different than what it is. Don't analyze it and don't judge it, right? Don't give it any label. It could be anger, sadness, shame, guilt, despair, resentment, etc., but don't name it. Only focus on the sensation somatically and the feeling. And as you are with the feeling, let go also of any efforts to modify in any way. Just let it be. Your body has a strong somatic intelligence that will help you to resolve it all.
And
right?
and to add, one of the most common things that people do at this stage is they focus on the feeling, aggressively trying to make it go away. And that's very different from just being with it with curiosity and acceptance.
Yeah,
so
don't try to...
No, because you'll actually encapsulate the tension or feeling with more emotion if you do that.
Totally surrender to the feeling. Do not try to make it go away. The resistance of it makes it actually worse.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And then, to emphasize again what Laura just mentioned, very important, ignore any thoughts that come up in the process because your mind will attract and make a story up to distract you from the process. It will tempt you to project this feeling on others or blame it on something or someone or a story for the way you feel. So in this process, important to reject and ignore all these thoughts.
Easier said than done, but your point of attention is just to keep returning to the body because if you're going off into a storyline, you're not focusing on the body anymore.
Exactly. And I noticed from personal experience, getting caught up in the thoughts and mental process will only intensify the feeling without transmuting it. It's like putting gasoline onto a fire. Now, also important, this process we just laid out here is not an overnight process, right? It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you have never done it before. You need to get used to it, to learn the process. But there may also many layers, many suppressed emotions that are a result of childhood wounding you're not aware of, trauma, or also social cultural conditioning. So there are many layers to work through. You cannot force the process. It may also be necessary to work with someone, a professional therapist, or go deeper into somatic trauma work. parts work, internal family system helps with this. Shadow work, obviously, and many other psycho-spiritual modalities.
Shadow work done somatically, though, not mentally.
Exactly. Okay. Now, just to finish off, do you know when you truly have transmuted a negative emotion, surrendered it, and let go of it without suppressing, projecting, or escaping it? Number one, you will notice that all negative feelings are associated with our basic fear related to survival and comes down to the fear of death. You will realize that all negative feelings are merely survival programs that the mind believes are necessary, and at some point they may have been necessary to protect yourself in the past. Now, to be surrendered truly to the feelings means to have no strong emotion about anything. So if something comes up and it's okay if it happens and it's okay if it doesn't, or a person, neither positive or negative projections. If you have no strong emotional reactions to certain things, either way, that's also a good sign that you've transmuted it.
Yeah. Easier said than done, and we're working through this collectively right now.
Exactly.
So if you do have strong emotions, this is an opportunity to implement everything he said, because as I said with the Mars-Pluto opposition, we're in the process of actually transmuting a lot of strong emotions collectively and trying not to project them on others.
Yeah, it's a place of more healthy detachment.
Yes.
Right? Not dissociation, detachment.
Yeah, like
Big
you know
difference.
you've resolved a major trauma from your past when you no longer have this intense emotional charge towards it. That's been my experience.
And it may take time, right?
Yes.
In doses.
It doesn't happen in one session.
Yeah. Also, another sign is that external events in your life or in the world do not disturb your inner peace of joy and contentment anymore, right? Your inner balance, your joy within does not depend on external things, places, people, situations, anything. And also emotions, they come and go. And over time, you come to understand that you are not your emotions as you learn not to identify with them, period. Yet you don't suppress or avoid them either. You just let them flow through you.
Yeah.
Right? While you're feeling them, and then you let them go. Ultimately, you become then, during this process, actually more identified with your true self, or you're bringing the true self more up to conscious awareness, which then acts more as the impartial witness, so to speak. And in this process, then you can identify with more deeper levels or higher levels of consciousness, right? It brings really, it's a spiritual process at the same time, because it brings you closer to your true self, connection to the divine, and reveals also to you that you are most often misled by your emotions, right? Well, once you thought you were at their mercy, but now you realize that they don't define you. That's a big one too. Very important. Another aspect of, you have truly transmuted negative emotions is when you stop blaming anyone or anything for the way you feel or your circumstances and events in life. And very most important, as a result of truly transmuting negative emotions, you will experience and will see yourself actually embodying more positive emotions. You have more access to energy, life force, creative force, creativity, courage, joy, excitement, inspiration, true love, compassion, empathy, also forgiveness and higher levels of consciousness, which are ultimately an expression of being also closer to God, to the divine, your true essence. And ultimately on higher levels, having transmuted lower states of consciousness and these lower emotions, you will start to see the divine in all his magnificent creation. You develop a deeper spiritual vision that is more holistic and nuanced and less caught in the duality of good or bad and all these oversimplified black and white views of reality.
Yeah. So this is a process that we're in of very deep emotional and psychological transmutation with this Mars-Pluto opposition carrying us into the election. We don't need everyone to do this, but the more of us do this and the more of us that develop the spiritual vision, the higher that we can go as a collective. We don't need actually the whole world to raise our level of consciousness in order to change the world.
True.
We only need a small percentage of people who affect the entire field. So, if we do this right now, even though you might think it's like escaping, it's actually escaping to blame the outside world for what's going on within us.
Yes.
So, okay. So wrapping up, in the second hour, we're going to talk about the astrology of the U.S., We're going to compare Trump's chart, Kamala's chart, RFK Jr.'s chart with America's chart. So we're really talking about the U.S. natal Pluto and the evolutionary journey from the USA. So we're looking at it from an evolutionary astrology perspective. And then we're going to discuss the question, which will be very controversial. Do these current political candidates help the USA with its evolutionary intention or not? Obviously, this is my opinion. So listen at your own risk. And then we're also going to talk about Wetiko and collective psychosis and how we can work with that. So, we do have Wetiko kind of on steroids right now. It's been like this for the past 4 years, maybe even below that. And so how can we work with these forces of evil within ourselves? How can we really, face the Wetiko and the evil within us as well, so that we can connect with our own authentic self and, come up with more creative solutions to what's going on in the world rather than just blaming the outside world, because we're really being called to do some necessary psychological and spiritual work to help humanity's evolution. Like, in my opinion, it's not just about making America physically healthy again, even though that's very important and that's the foundation. But how can we also make this world more emotionally and psychologically healthy and use this chaos as a necessary alchemical fuel? We need to do that, because when things are calm, when things are stable, people are not as called to do this kind of work, I have to say. And I've seen this in individuals as well. But the crazier things are, the more you can avoid yourself. So we have an excellent opportunity here as well to help humanity raise the level of consciousness, because the only thing that will change this world is a change of consciousness. And we can do that right now.
Excellent. So definitely tune into the second hour. If you're not a member yet, go to my website, veilofreality.com, and you can sign up to the membership there. And you'll get access to all the second hours of our Cosmic Matrix podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back.